So one of the things students were struggling with is telling the difference between type 1 and type 2 error in context. This is a question I saw a lot during office hour appointments. So I'm going to guide you guys through, if you weren't somebody who came to office hours and asked this question, but you were wondering, I'm going to guide you through what I typically tell a student in office hours about type 1 and type 2 errors. First is there's a ton of different ways to break these down. So type 1 error, the formal definition, right, is when we reject the null when the null is actually false. Sorry, I keep saying this. I've actually redone this video twice. Not because of that. I would leave a mistake in, but for other reasons. Rejecting the null when the null is actually true. To me, that's just a lot to have. Obviously, you guys have notes, and so you can bring this up, and you have it, and you don't have to think about what the definition is. But I typically think about this as rejecting the null incorrectly. And no matter what, you do want to think of this as two pieces. I had some people who are just giving me half of this and not both pieces. There is a decision. This is what we decided as statisticians. And then there is the underlying truth, right? Like what is actually true, the thing that most of the time we'll never actually know about. So the other way I like to do this in terms of a definition, since in every context question, I typically give you the null and the alternative, unless it's one where you can figure it out from context clues like having a more than or less than. As you saw if you looked at that mixed review with the worked problems. So if we have a null and an alternative, I will sometimes call a type 1 error one where we put our truth on the first of our two hypotheses. So in this case, the T goes here for the truth, and then our decision must have been this. Because if we make an error, these two things don't line up. Now, the last definition that sometimes works for students is this idea of, oops, I wanted black, that a type 1 error is essentially a false positive. This works especially well if you're thinking about the court case example with us convicting a guilty person, or a pregnancy test example with someone getting a false positive on a pregnancy test. If you Google pregnancy test types of error, you'll see a ridiculous drawing of like an old man being told he's pregnant and a obviously pregnant woman being told she's not pregnant as our type 1 and type 2 errors respectively. Some students, it also just works to have one of the context problems in their brain. Like it just helps them to do that. Whether it's the pregnancy test example or the guilty convicted, whatever it might be, let's go ahead and look at the court case example, innocent and guilty. So in this case, again, we think about rejecting the null means that we would reject that null and we would make that as our decision. We decide they're guilty. So we need to think about what that decision would lead to. That decision would lead to a conviction. So there's my decision piece of this. And then we need to come back and say, well, what was actually going on? In this case, the truth was the person was innocent. So we're going to convict an innocent person. So there's our truth. So we need two pieces. And then this, I've seen it before, a lot of stats like memes of this is Shawshank, if you've seen that movie, and then type 2 error is O.J. Simpson. But all the things just reverse in a type 2 error. Now we're looking at failing to reject the null when the null is false. If we think about this ho-ha business, that means our decision is going to be here, even though truly we never get to decide this in real statistics life. And our truth is here. And again, as our last piece, this is a false negative. So in the court case example, where we have our innocent and our guilty, this would be, again, decision is here. What do we do if someone is innocent? Well, we acquit them or we let them go. So we say acquit. There's our decision. And then what was the actual truth? A guilty person. So those are our two pieces. I love these examples because the four possible answer choices are super easy to write for me as an instructor. It's just, what were the decisions and what are these different combinations? So I could also acquit an innocent person and I could convict a guilty person. And a strategy to use as a student is to get rid of those correct decisions right off the bat. Convicting someone who's guilty, that's a good thing. Let's cross that off. Acquitting an innocent person, again, that's a good thing. Let's cross that off. And now we're down to two, and figuring out however we want to, which one is which. I leave that up to you, but I just wanted to give you guys all of these different ways, whichever one works for you, whether it's the formal definition, whether it's a sort of slightly tweaked version of that formal definition, if it's this little truth and decision thing that I do with the truth going on the hoe and then the decision going on the ha for a type 1 or vice versa for a type 2, or if it's thinking back to a false positive, or maybe even, again, having an example that just sticks with you that helps you put everything into that same context.